Archaeologists have been quietly sitting on one of the strangest mysteries in human history. Thousands of ancient human skeletons, some of them over 30,000 years old, have been found with something bizarre. Their faces are fixed, in a smile. Not a coincidence, not decomposition, deliberately arranged, on purpose. And for most of history, we had no idea why, until researchers started connecting dots between burial rituals, ancient beliefs, and one terrifying philosophy that ancient humans held about death, and found that the answer is something nobody in your history class ever told you. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you're going to look at graveyards, and maybe even your own smile, completely differently. Let's start with the actual evidence, because this isn't a theory, it's a pattern found across 6 continents, spanning 30,000 years of human history. In 2018, archaeologists excavating a site in Shanidar Cave, in what is now northern Iraq, discovered a 60,000-year-old Neanderthal burial. Around the body, they found pollen from flowers, carefully placed, medicinal plants, a specific arrangement that could only be deliberate. The skull was positioned with the jaw slightly open and the cheekbones elevated. In modern anatomy, that is exactly how a smile is formed. This wasn't random. Rigor mortis alone doesn't do that. Someone arranged it, and Shanidar wasn't alone. Sites across ancient Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, Egypt, Celtic Britain, and pre-Columbian Americas show the same deliberate facial positioning in burials. Researchers had to ask, what were these people trying to say? Because the answer has 3 completely different explanations, all of them true, all of them happening at the same time, and each one gets darker than the last. The first explanation is the one that makes the most immediate physical sense, and it starts with a chemical your brain makes when it thinks you're about to die. In 2023, researchers at the University of Michigan published a study on near-death experiences. They monitored patients whose hearts had stopped. In the final moments before death, the brain doesn't shut down quietly, it surges. A massive flood of gamma waves, the same brain activity seen in moments of deep meditation, creative insight, and overwhelming joy. The dying brain releases a tidal wave of endorphins, serotonin, and DMT, a naturally occurring compound that produces euphoric, visionary states. In simple terms, your brain throws a party the second before you die. And this isn't new research. Indigenous peoples across 6 cultures, from the Yanomami of the Amazon to the Dogon of West Africa, had a name for this state. They called it the joyful crossing. They didn't know about gamma waves, but they observed dying people, people who came back from the brink, and what those survivors described was not terror, it was bliss. The smile that ancient burial arrangers gave their dead, it may have been literally accurate, a reflection of what the face actually looked like at the final moment. They weren't faking it, they were preserving it, but the biological explanation only answers the what, not the why. Because, here's the thing, ancient peoples didn't just observe the smile, they engineered it. In cultures where a natural smile didn't occur, they made one. And to understand why, you need to understand how ancient humans saw the relationship between a face and the spirit that lived behind it. In ancient Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, Syria, and Turkey, there was a belief called me, pronounced may, the divine force that animated all living things. When you died, me didn't disappear, it hovered. It needed guidance on where to go next. The face, particularly the smile, was the beacon. It was the signal the spirit followed to find its path to the underworld or the heavens. A grimace, a frozen scream, would signal distress. The spirit would linger, confused, unable to cross. This was the ancient world's greatest fear, a ghost stuck between worlds. The Egyptians understood this deeply in the Book of the Dead, one of the oldest written texts in existence. There is an entire chapter dedicated to the positioning of the deceased's face at burial. Chapter 22 of the Book of the Dead is literally titled, "The Chapter of Giving a Mouth to the Deceased." Not a metaphor, a physical instruction. Egyptian burial priests were trained specialists. Their entire career was the art of making the dead look right, peaceful, ready, smiling. Because in Egyptian cosmology, you would be judged in the afterlife. And how could you arrive at judgment looking terrified? You needed to look confident. Across the ancient world, the same idea took different shapes. In Celtic Britain, Archaeologists found burial sites where corpses were arranged not just with smiles, but in poses of laughter, not peaceful, not serene, full, open-mouthed laughter frozen in bone. This confused researchers for decades, until someone connected it to Celtic mythology. In ancient Celtic belief, the afterlife wasn't a solemn place of judgment. It was called Trnang, the land of the ever-young, and it was described as a perpetual celebration, feasts that never ended, battles that were glorious and painless, music that never stopped, pure ecstatic joy, forever. If that's where you were going, why would you arrive with a straight face? The Norse had a similar logic. Warriors killed in battle weren't mourned, they were celebrated, because they had earned the right to feast in Valhalla with Odin himself. Viking burial records, the Eddas, the sagas, describe the chosen warriors, the Einherjar, arriving at Valhalla laughing, arriving mid-battle cry, arriving ready. A joyful death face wasn't just cosmetic, it was a declaration. I am ready. I am not afraid. I arrive as a warrior, not a victim. Now, here's where the story gets genuinely dark, because a third explanation has been hiding in ancient medical texts, and it has nothing to do with spirituality or neuroscience. It has to do with a plant called Oenantha crocata, known today as hemlock water dropwort, one of the most toxic plants on Earth. Roman and Greek texts, including Pliny the Elder and Dioscorides, describe something called the Sardinian smile, or in Latin, risus sardonicus, a grotesque grin caused by poisoning. The poison from this plant causes every muscle in the face to contract simultaneously. The result is a locked, rictus grin that looks, on the surface, exactly like a smile. And here's what connects it to ancient burials. This plant grew prolifically along the coasts of Sardinia, in Sicily, in the ancient Levant, the exact geographies where smiling burial patterns are most dense. The hypothesis, first published formally in 2009 by Dr. Giovanni Appendino, is that some of the smiling dead were executed or ritually sacrificed using this plant. Sacrificed, not peacefully, with a substance that locked their face into a permanent, involuntary grin at the moment of death. But here's where it gets philosophically complicated. In the cultures that used it, this wasn't considered cruel. These were often willing deaths, ritual sacrifices to ensure a good harvest, to appease a god, to send a message to the underworld alongside a great chief. And the smile, even the chemically induced one, was considered the correct face for crossing over. It served the same purpose as the arranged smile. It said, this person crossed willingly, joyfully, ready. Let me give you specifics, because the general picture is fascinating, but the individual cases are what make this real. 1800 BC, the Royal Cemetery of Ur, in ancient Sumer, modern-day Iraq. Archaeologist Leonard Woolley uncovered 16 royal tombs containing something extraordinary. 74 attendants buried alongside the king. Attendants who had apparently walked into the tombs voluntarily, drunk a sedative liquid, and lay down to die. Woolley found small cups beside each of them, the cups they had drunk from, and the faces arranged in expressions of peace, some with what bone analysts later described as a smile configuration. Whoever these 74 people were, they left this world the way their culture believed was correct. Willingly, peacefully smiling, jump forward to 300 BC ancient Greece. The Socratic tradition had a philosophical concept called euthanasia, which literally means beautiful death in Greek. Not assisted suicide in the modern sense, something more radical. The idea that how you died was as important as how you lived, that your final expression was your final statement. Socrates himself reportedly died with a composed, peaceful expression. His students noted it, they recorded it, because in their worldview, the face at death was the punctuation at the end of your life sentence. And in Japan, 900 years later, the samurai formalized this into Bushido, the code of the warrior. And a central pillar of Bushido was dying well, dying with a face that showed no fear. The Japanese term shinigao, meaning the death face, was considered a reflection of the person's soul. A dishonorable death face brought shame to the family. A serene one brought honor that outlasted generations. Here's where the story pivots, because we've been asking why the dead were smiling. But the more interesting question is, why did the living care so much about it? Grief researchers have a concept called the last image problem. The face of a person at the moment of death is disproportionately powerful in the memory of the bereaved. Studies from the University of London found that the facial expression of a deceased person can affect the grief process of survivors for decades. A peaceful expression accelerates healing. A distressed one prolongs trauma. Ancient peoples had no psychology textbooks, but they observed this. They saw that the communities whose dead looked peaceful, grieved differently, moved forward faster, stayed functional. The arranged smile wasn't just for the dead, it was designed for the living. It was a community technology for managing collective grief. Think about what that means. These people 30,000 years ago were performing grief therapy without knowing what grief therapy was. They were using the body of their loved one as a message to the community. This person was okay. They arrived at peace. We will be okay too. Anthropologist Paul Ekman, who spent 40 years studying how faces communicate across cultures, documented that the human smile is the only facial expression that has the same meaning in every single culture on Earth. Languages are different. Greetings are different. Death rituals are wildly different, but the smile, universal. Which means when ancient humans chose the smile as the face for death, they chose the most universally understood symbol of good that existed in human biology. In sub-Saharan Africa, the Yoruba people of modern Nigeria have a burial tradition called EGNGN Ancestor Masquerade, and central to it is the belief that the dead should be prepared to entertain. The dead, in Yoruba belief, return to watch over the living, and they return joyfully. The burial face is prepared to reflect the joy of the spirit's continued existence. In Mexico, Dia de los Muertos is the most famous modern echo of this idea. The dead are welcomed back as honored guests. The calaveras, the smiling skull, is everywhere. And it's not macabre, it's a celebration. The smiling skull is the whole message. Death is not the end. The spirit smiles because it is still here, still part of us. Across ancient China, ancient Rome, the Maya civilization, indigenous Australian burial traditions, the same drive to curate the death face appears. Different theologies, different geographies, different centuries, same instinct. Now here's the part of the story that nobody talks about, because somewhere in the last 200 years, in industrialized Western culture, we handed this job to strangers. For almost all of human history, the dead were prepared at home, by family, by community, by people who loved them and knew their face. The act of arranging the dead, of making them look right, was a profound act of final intimacy, a goodbye that your hands delivered. In the United States, the shift happened between 1880 and 1920. The professionalization of mortuary science. Funeral parlors appeared. Death moved out of the home. The stated reason was hygiene. The real reason was industrialization. Death became a service, a transaction. And grief research shows us what happened next. Disconnection from the death of loved ones became more traumatic, not less. The absence of that final physical intimacy left a hole, because the ritual of preparing the dead, including the act of arranging the face, wasn't just for the deceased. It was the community processing grief together, out loud, with their hands. There's a modern movement called Death Positive, led by organizations like the Order of the Good Death, that is literally trying to bring this back, to reclaim the right to prepare your own loved ones. And the ancient smile is at the center of it. The question these communities are reclaiming: what face do we give our loved ones for their crossing? Let's close the loop on the science, because that 2023 University of Michigan study I mentioned at the start, it had a finding they buried in the footnotes. In all 8 patients whose brains were monitored in their final moments, all 8 showed the gamma wave surge. All 8 showed, on the monitoring equipment, a brain pattern consistent with intense positive emotion. 8 out of 8. Not a fluke, not a coincidence. The lead researcher, Dr. Jimo Borjigan, said, and I want to quote this carefully, that the dying brain appears to be unlocking a reserve of consciousness in its final moments. A reserve of consciousness. That's not mysticism. That's a peer-reviewed, published neuroscience finding from 2023. Ancient humans built an entire spiritual architecture, burial rituals, death cosmologies, smiling preparations, around something they had observed but couldn't explain. And now we have the explanation. They were right. The dying experience bliss. And the smile, 60,000 years of the smile, was the world's oldest way of saying, we know, we all go the same way, and it's going to be okay. So here's where we land. Every culture in human history, from Neanderthals to samurai to Yoruba elders to Mexican grandmothers, arrived at the same conclusion without comparing notes: that death isn't the end of a story, it's the final expression of it, and that expression should be chosen, not left to chance. And here's the thought that I can't shake after going deep into this. All of those burial preparers, those priests, those family members, who spent hours getting the face right, they weren't grieving less, they were grieving better, because they had a task, a job, a way to channel love into action at the hardest possible moment. The smile they gave their dead was the last gift they could give, and it was designed deliberately, carefully, across 60,000 years of human tradition, to say, I am not afraid, I was here, I go now, and I am okay. The next time you see a skull in a museum, in a movie, on a Dia de los Muertos altar, I want you to look at it differently. That grin isn't death mocking you. It's 30,000 years of human beings sending you the same message: we came before you. We were afraid. We found something at the end that looked like joy, and we wanted you to know. If this changed how you see something you thought you already knew, that's what history is for. Drop a comment, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and I'll see you in the next one.